You ever notice how some people think they can size you up just by the kind of car you drive? They glance at the faded paint, the squeaky door, maybe a dent on the bumper, and suddenly in their mind you've been boxed, labeled, and written off. That's exactly what happened to me one summer evening when I pulled up to my daughter's house for dinner. Now let me paint the picture for you. My car, my old trusty sedan, wasn't much to look at anymore. It was a dull shade of blue, the kind that used to sparkle years ago but had long since surrendered to the sun and the rain. The driver's side mirror had a tiny crack that caught the light, and the engine gave a low grumble when I turned it off, like an old man sighing after a long day. But that car had been with me through thick and thin. It carried my daughter to school, carried groceries home on nights I worked double shifts, and even carried me to my husband's hospital bed when time was running out. To me it wasn't just a car. It was a piece of my story. But to my son-in-law? Well, he saw something entirely different. I parked at the curb, smoothed down my blouse, and grabbed the little casserole dish I'd made. My mother's recipe, always a hit at family dinners. As I walked up the neat, manicured driveway to their bright suburban home, I noticed a couple of the neighbors peeking out from their own garages. Everyone in this neighborhood seemed to be competing. Who had the best lawn, the shiniest car, the fanciest mailbox? I never really cared for that sort of thing. The door opened before I even rang the bell. My daughter, sweet as always, rushed forward to hug me. "Mom, you made it." She looked radiant like she always does, but I caught the flicker of something in her eyes. Was it nervousness? Maybe she already knew how her husband might act. Behind her, standing tall in his polished shoes and neatly pressed shirt, was Brad, my son-in-law. A man who always carried himself like he was walking into a board meeting, even in his own living room. His smile was polite but sharp, the kind of smile that hides a sneer. Well, Evelyn," he said, glancing past me toward the curb where my old car Saturday. "I didn't hear you pull up. I guess that old thing doesn't make much noise anymore, huh? Or does it rattle too much for me to notice?" I felt my daughter stiffen beside me. She shot him a look, but he didn't seem to care. He was already chuckling at his own joke, loosening his collar like he'd just delivered a punchline at a comedy club. I smiled, just a small quiet smile, and walked past him into the house. "Good to see you too, Brad," I said, handing the casserole to my daughter. But he wasn't done. "You know, Mom, I was just telling Sarah the other day, maybe it's time you treat yourself to something a little more respectable. I mean, that car has to be, 20 years old? Doesn't exactly scream success, if you know what I mean." His words hung in the air like smoke. My daughter busied herself with the dish, cheeks red, pretending not to hear. I set my purse down on the counter, still calm, still composed, though inside, I felt that familiar twinge. The mix of hurt and indignation when someone tries to belittle you. I looked around the dining room at the gleaming oak table, the sparkling chandelier, the carefully staged decor. Everything screamed perfection, but it also screamed insecurity. Brad was the kind of man who wanted the world to believe he had it all, even if it meant stepping on others to prop himself up. Dinner was lively, but not in the way you'd hope. Brad dominated the conversation as always. He talked about his latest business deal, the new SUV he'd just bought, and the vacation he was planning in Cabo. Every now and then he'd slip in another jab at my car. "Hope your old ride makes it home tonight," he joked once, raising his glass of wine. "If not, I've got the number for a tow truck." The neighbors who joined us, friends of Brad and Sarah's, laughed politely, though I noticed the discomfort in their eyes. My daughter's smile looked painted on, her laughter forced. Me? I stayed quiet. Not silent in defeat, but quiet in observation. Because sometimes the best thing you can do is let people show exactly who they are. I studied Brad as he went on and on. His voice grew louder with every glass of wine. His hands gestured wildly, showing off his Rolex. He leaned back in his chair like a king surveying his kingdom, while I sat at the other end, the poor old woman in her outdated car. But what he didn't know, what nobody at that table knew, was that appearances are deceiving. That old car he mocked wasn't a reflection of my bank account. It was a choice. A deliberate one. My husband and I had made more money in our lifetime than Brad could ever dream of, but we never felt the need to flaunt it. Our values were different. And sitting there listening to him, I realized something important. Brad needed a lesson. Not a lecture, he wouldn't hear it anyway. He needed something unforgettable. something that would pierce through his arrogance like a pin to a balloon. The thought made me almost laugh to myself, because in my garage just a few miles away, sat a car that could silence Brad faster than any words could. A car that was the complete opposite of the old sedan parked outside his house. A car I hadn't driven in years but kept polished, loved, and waiting. And as I sipped my water and nodded at Brad's stories, I thought to myself, you think you know me, son, but you don't know a thing. And soon enough you're going to learn. For now though, I let the dinner roll on. I let him have his stage, let him feel untouchable. Because little did he know, the curtain was about to fall. And I couldn't wait to see the look on his face when it did. I didn't say much at that dinner, but the silence gave me time to think. Time to remember how I became the kind of woman who could sit at a table, listen to someone mock her, and still hold her head high. See, I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. Far from it. I grew up in a small town where everybody knew everybody, and if your shoes had holes, people noticed. My father worked at a steel mill, my mother cleaned houses. We didn't have much, but we had pride. Pride in doing things the right way, pride in working for what you had, pride in respecting people no matter what they looked like or what they drove. Those lessons never left me. When I was just 19, I met Thomas. He wasn't flashy, not the type to impress you with a car or a fancy watch. But he had a kind smile, steady hands, and a vision. He told me once, Evelyn, I don't want to be the richest man in the world. I just want to build something we can be proud of. And that's exactly what we did. We married young, had Sarah a couple of years later, and while other people were spending money to look successful, Thomas and I were saving. Every penny we could spare, we tucked away. He started a small construction business and I handled the books. We worked side by side night after night, and slowly that business grew. First he was building porches in garages, then whole houses, eventually contracts for office buildings, hotels, even schools. People used to ask us why we still lived in the same modest home, why I drove the same old car, why we never seemed to flaunt our success. And I'd tell them the truth. Because money doesn't change who we are. It only gives us choices. And my choice always was humility. I can still remember one afternoon years ago when Thomas and I were walking downtown. A shiny red sports car zipped past us, the kind that turned every head. Thomas chuckled and said, "Now that's a toy. Someday when we've made it, maybe I'll buy one of those." Well, someday came. By the time we were in our 50s, the business had flourished. We had more money than we could ever spend. And one day Thomas surprised me. Parked in our garage was a Lamborghini. A gleaming, roaring masterpiece of engineering. He had that boyish grin on his face, the one I fell in love with, and he said, "We worked for this. We earned this. It's not just a car, Evelyn. It's a symbol of what we built together." We drove that Lamborghini only a handful of times. It wasn't practical, of course, but that wasn't the point. It was ours. It was a reminder that humble beginnings don't define your ending. After Thomas passed, I couldn't bring myself to sell it. I kept it tucked away, polished and pristine, almost like a sacred memory of him. It was the last big thing we bought together, and every time I saw it I thought of his laughter, his vision, his faith in me, in us. And yet, I never told Sarah about it. Not really. She was busy building her own life, and I didn't want her to measure herself against us, or feel pressured by what we had. I wanted her to know that happiness isn't about outshining anyone else. It's about love, respect, and the choices you make. That's why I still drove the old sedan. People looked at me and saw someone ordinary, maybe even struggling, and I didn't mind one bit. If anything, it reminded me who I was. The woman who built from nothing. The woman who didn't need to prove herself to anyone. But sitting at that dinner table, hearing Brad's smug little comments, I realized there was a danger in staying quiet forever. My daughter had married a man who believed success was measured in leather seats and chrome finishes. He thought driving an expensive car made him superior to others. Worse, he thought mocking someone else made him look stronger. That wasn't the kind of man I wanted influencing Sarah. And it certainly wasn't the kind of son-in-law I was going to let walk around unchecked. I stirred my mashed potatoes slowly, nodding while Brad went on about his latest deal. But inside I was weighing my options. Should I call him out right then and there? Should I embarrass him in front of his guests? No. That would be too easy, too fleeting. A man like Brad needed something bigger, something lasting. He needed to be shown, not told. That's when the image of the Lamborghini came rushing back to me, as clear as day. I could see the sleek lines, the way the sun once bounced off the hood, the sound of the engine purring like a wild animal. And I thought, what better way to teach Brad a lesson than to use the very thing he worships, status, luxury, cars, to flip the script on him? I could almost hear Thomas's voice in my head, amused and proud. You always did know how to put people in their place, Evelyn. From that moment the plan started taking shape. I'd bide my time. I wouldn't rush. I'd let Brad dig his own hole a little deeper, show everyone just how arrogant he could be. And then when the time was right I'd lower the boom. But I had to be careful. The lesson wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about showing off what I had. It was about teaching respect. And if I pulled it off right, maybe, just maybe, it would change him for the better. After dinner that night, when I finally climbed into my old sedan and turned the key, the engine coughed awake like it always did. I sat there for a moment, watching the lights in my daughter's house flicker through the curtains, listening to the faint sound of laughter inside. I thought about Sarah, about how she deserved a husband who lifted her up, not one who embarrassed her family for sport. I put the car in gear and pulled away slowly, the night air cool through the open window. And as the houses blurred past, I made myself a promise. Brad had had his fun mocking me tonight, but the day was coming soon, when he'd find himself on the receiving end of a surprise he'd never forget. And it would involve a car. Just not the one he thought. The clinking of silverware and the hum of small talk filled the dining room, but there was no mistaking who owned the spotlight that night. Brad leaned back in his chair like it was his throne, waving his wine glass around as if he were giving a TED Talk nobody asked for. His voice was just loud enough to drown out anyone else who tried to speak. You wouldn't believe the deal I closed last week, he began for the third time. It's not easy negotiating with people who think they're smarter than you. But I have a way of cutting through the noise. That's what makes me stand out. He smiled that smug little smile, glancing around the table to make sure everyone had heard. His neighbors, two couples he had invited, nodded politely, though I could see the stiffness in their shoulders. Even they were starting to grow weary of him. Sarah sat beside him, pushing a green bean around her plate, her eyes cast down. She laughed on cue when he made a joke, but it was the kind of laugh that didn't reach her eyes. That bothered me more than his words. Brad turned toward me suddenly, his grin widening. So, Evelyn, tell me, how's the old beater holding up? Didn't sound too healthy when you pulled in. The table went quiet. Forks paused in midair. My daughter's face flushed crimson. I looked at him steadily, not flinching. It gets me where I need to go. Well, sure, he said, chuckling. But don't you think you deserve better? I mean, what if it breaks down on the highway? What if you're stranded somewhere? You can't rely on something that old forever. He shook his head, leaning back like he had just imparted great wisdom. I don't get it. Why hang on to something that's past its prime? It's almost embarrassing. He laughed again, waiting for others to join in. The neighbors offered weak smiles, their eyes darting toward me as if to apologize silently. I smiled too, though mine was different. Calmer. Controlled. Embarrassing to who, Brad? I asked softly. His grin faltered just a touch. He wasn't used to me talking back. Well, I mean, embarrassing to you. Don't you want to feel proud when you pull up somewhere? Don't you want people to look at your car and think, wow, she's got it together? I let the question hang there for a moment. I don't measure my worth by what strangers think when I park my car. The silence stretched. My daughter looked at me with a flicker of gratitude, though she didn't dare speak. Brad, on the other hand, didn't know when to quit. He laughed again, louder this time, as though the force of it could erase the sting of my words. Well, I guess that's one way to look at it. But hey, if you ever change your mind, I know a dealer who can set you up with something respectable. You'd look great in a Mercedes. Or maybe a Lexus. Trust me, people notice these things. It's about image. And in this world, image is everything. He said it with such certainty, like it was a universal truth. I studied him, the way his eyes flicked toward his neighbors, making sure they were impressed. The way his hand kept brushing his expensive watch so everyone could see the glint of gold. It was clear as day Brad needed validation the way most people need air. I took a sip of water, calm as ever. Is that what you believe, Brad? That image is everything. He leaned forward, eager for the stage again. Of course. People judge you before you even open your mouth. The car you drive, the clothes you wear, it all says something. You can't afford to look small. Not if you want respect. Respect. The word rang in my ears like a bell. He didn't even realize how much he had revealed about himself in that one sentence. To him, respect wasn't something earned by character or kindness. It was bought, worn like a suit, parked in the driveway for neighbors to see. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but I held back. Instead, I leaned just slightly closer and said, "Funny thing about respect, Brad. The people who truly deserve it don't have to ask for it. And they certainly don't have to buy it." The neighbor's eyes widened. One of them almost choked on his wine. My daughter's fork clattered onto her plate. Brad froze, his mouth opening then closing again. For the first time that evening, he had no quick comeback. I leaned back, returning to my food as if nothing had happened. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Brad forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow. "Well, I suppose that's another way to look at it," he muttered, shifting in his chair. But the flush creeping up his neck betrayed him. I didn't press further. There was no need. He'd shown enough of himself for one night. Let him stew in his own discomfort. Dinner continued, though the energy had shifted. The neighbors now asked Sarah more questions, clearly preferring her quiet warmth to Brad's bluster. Brad tried to steer the spotlight back to himself, but his voice lacked the same authority as before. It was like the thread had unraveled, and no matter how he tugged, he couldn't weave it back together. I sat quietly observing, storing every detail away. Because this was only the beginning. He thought he had humiliated me, but in truth, he had only set the stage for what was coming. By the time dessert was served, Brad had retreated into sulky silence, nursing his wine glass like it owed him something. My daughter smiled at me across the table, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and apology. I gave her a small nod as if to say, "It's all right. I've got this under control." When the plates were cleared and the guests began leaving, Brad walked me to the door. He was polite enough, but his words carried an edge. "No hard feelings, Evelyn," he said with a tight smile. "I know you didn't mean anything by it." I met his eyes. "Oh, I meant every word, Brad. Every single one." For a moment something flickered in his gaze. Anger maybe, or fear. Then he laughed again, shaking his head as if I were a silly old woman who didn't know better. I stepped out into the night air, the cool breeze brushing my face. My car sat at the curb, exactly where I'd left it, old and unremarkable. Brad's new SUV gleamed in the driveway, polished to perfection, a mirror of his own ego. I opened the door of my sedan, slid inside and started the engine. It coughed and rattled just as it always did, but I found the sound comforting. Because unlike Brad's shiny toy, this car had character. It had history. It had meaning. And soon enough, it would play a part in teaching him a lesson he'd never forget. As I drove away, headlights cutting through the quiet streets, I felt a sense of anticipation building. Brad thought he'd won the night with his jabs and smirks. But what he didn't realize was that the game had only just begun. That night, when I got home and parked my old sedan in the garage, I didn't head straight inside like usual. Instead, I walked past the shelves stacked with tools, boxes of holiday decorations, and gardening supplies until I reached the corner. There, covered by a heavy gray tarp, sat the secret Brad didn't know about. I tugged the tarp back slowly, my fingers brushing against the silky paint of a car most people only ever saw in magazines. A Lamborghini. Sleek, sharp, its curves as smooth as a sculpture, its paint still shining like liquid metal. Even after all these years, it looked brand new, untouched by time. I rested my hand on the hood and let the memories wash over me. It was 20 years ago when Thomas brought this car home. I remember the sound before I saw it, the low, throaty growl of the engine as he pulled into the driveway. I had been in the kitchen pulling a pie out of the oven when I heard that sound so unlike anything I'd heard before. Curious, I stepped outside, apron still tied around my waist, and there he was. My husband, grinning ear to ear, leaning against a Lamborghini like he was a teenager who had just aced his first driving test. "What on earth is this?" I asked, half laughing, half scolding. "This," he said, patting the roof with pride, "is ours." I shook my head, stunned. "Thomas, are you out of your mind?" A Lamborghini? We don't need this. He just kept smiling the way only he could. No, Evelyn. We don't need it. That's exactly the point. This isn't about need. It's about want. It's about celebrating how far we've come. Remember those nights we stayed up late balancing the books? The times we worried whether payroll would clear? The sacrifices we made when Sarah was little? This is for us. I remember staring at him then, my heart full. Because he wasn't wrong. We had worked ourselves to the bone for decades, building a business, building a life, building a future. And in that moment, that car wasn't just a machine, it was a symbol. Proof that we had done it together. Of course, we didn't drive it much. A car like that wasn't made for grocery runs or carpools. But every so often, Thomas would pull it out of the garage on a sunny Saturday, and we'd go for a drive with the top down. People would stare, jaws dropping, pointing, taking photos. And while Thomas loved the way it turned heads, I loved the way he looked behind the wheel. Like a man who had conquered the odds but never lost himself. The last time we drove it together was on our 30th wedding anniversary. We took it out to the lake, parked by the water, and had a picnic out of a wicker basket. I can still see the way the sunset reflected off the hood, painting the car in shades of gold and crimson. Thomas leaned back, his arm around me, and said, "If I go before you, Evelyn, promise me you'll keep this car. Don't sell it. Keep it for us." Promised. And I kept that promise. After he passed, I couldn't bear to drive it anymore. It was too painful, too full of memories. But I couldn't let it go either. So I covered it up, kept it safe, polished it once a month like it was a shrine. Some people keep wedding rings or letters. Me? I kept a Lamborghini. And now, standing there in the garage with the tarp pulled back, I felt Thomas with me again. His voice in my ear, his laughter echoing in the space. And I knew without a doubt that this car, the one thing Brad worshipped more than anything, was going to be the tool I used to teach him the lesson he so desperately needed. But I also knew something else. This wasn't about revenge. I didn't hate Brad. I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted to open his eyes. I wanted him to understand what Thomas and I had always known. That true worth isn't found in shiny toys or flashy status symbols. It's found in how you treat people, in how you carry yourself, in the respect you give and the respect you earn. Still, the irony wasn't lost on me. The very thing Brad used to measure others, the kind of car they drove, was about to humble him in ways he couldn't imagine. I pulled the tarp back over the Lamborghini and patted it one last time. "Soon," I whispered, almost like I was speaking to Thomas. "Soon this car will serve a purpose again. Not for joyrides, not for vanity, but for a lesson." I closed the garage door and went inside, the plan already forming in my mind. Over the next few days I couldn't stop thinking about Brad's face when he saw it. That smug smirk melting into shock, his cocky laugh dying in his throat. The thought made me smile, but beneath the smile was something deeper. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this experience could change him. For Sarah's sake, if not his own. I thought back to when Sarah first brought Brad home. He was charming then, I'll give him that. He knew exactly what to say, how to impress, how to make her feel special. But charm is a mask, and masks always slip eventually. Over the years I'd watched him reveal more and more of his true self. Arrogant, shallow, obsessed with appearances. And every time he mocked me, every time he belittled Sarah in subtle ways, every time he flaunted what he had, I saw a little more of that mask crumble. But maybe this would be the moment that cracked it wide open. I went to bed that night with a strange sense of calm. I didn't know exactly how or when I'd reveal the Lamborghini, but I knew the time was coming. And when it did, the impact would be unforgettable. I could almost hear Thomas again, whispering encouragement. "Teach him, Evelyn. Teach him the way only you can." I smiled in the dark, pulling the blanket tighter around me. Yes, I would teach him. And the lesson was going to roar louder than any engine he'd ever heard. The following week, Sarah invited me back over for another dinner. I could tell from her voice on the phone that she was hesitant, almost apologetic. "Mom, Brad's been, well, you know how he is," she said softly. "But I really want you to come. It would mean a lot." And of course I agreed. Because it wasn't about Brad, it was about Sarah. My daughter needed me, even if she didn't quite know how to say it. So that Friday evening I found myself pulling into the same spotless driveway, parking the same old sedan at the curb. The sun was just setting. the sky painted in streaks of orange and purple. As I cut the engine, I saw Brad through the front window, swirling a glass of scotch like he was starring in a commercial for it. The door swung open before I even reached the steps. "Well, well, Evelyn," Brad said, his grin wide, his tone dripping with condescension. "You made it without breaking down this time. I was half expecting a tow truck to pull up behind you." I heard the sharp intake of breath from my daughter standing behind him. "Brad," she whispered, her voice warning. But he just shrugged, unfazed, and stepped aside to let me in. I walked past him, smiling politely, as though his words had rolled off my back like water on glass. But inside I tucked the jab away. Another tally mark on the list of insults he'd thrown my way. Dinner was already set on the table. Sarah had cooked her roast chicken, the kind she knew I loved. I gave her hand a little squeeze as I sat down. "Smells wonderful, sweetheart," I said, ignoring Brad's smirk from across the table. The conversation started out innocent enough. We talked about Sarah's work, the garden she'd been planting, even the upcoming church fundraiser. But it didn't take long for Brad to steer things back to his favorite subject, himself. "You should have seen the look on the client's face when I pulled up in the new SUV," he said, puffing out his chest. "They knew right then they were dealing with someone successful. I mean, first impressions matter, don't they?" He glanced at me, his eyebrows raised like bait on a hook. I didn't bite. I just cut into my chicken and nodded. But he wasn't satisfied. "You know, Evelyn, I've been thinking about you. About that car of yours. It's really not safe for someone your age. What if it stalls out in traffic? What if you get stuck somewhere in the middle of the night? You should really think about upgrading. A respectable woman like you deserves something better." I placed my fork down gently and looked him square in the eye. "Brad, my car has never let me down. Can you say the same about yours?" The room went silent. Sarah's lips twitched, trying not to smile. Brad blinked, caught off guard, then forced a laugh. "Well, mine's brand new. Of course it hasn't let me down." I leaned back in my chair, still calm. "Give it time." That shut him up for a few seconds. He took a long sip of his scotch, his jaw tight. But like a mosquito that doesn't know when to quit, he circled back. "Still," he said, shaking his head, "I just don't get it. It's like you're stuck in the past. Don't you want to move forward? Don't you want people to see you've made something of yourself?" Now that one stung, not because it was true, but because it revealed exactly how shallow his thinking was. In his world, a woman's worth wasn't measured by her hard work, her values, or even the family she'd raised. No, in his eyes it came down to a shiny exterior. I folded my hands on the table. "Brad, let me ask you something. When you first met Sarah, did you fall in love with the car she drove?" He frowned, confused. "What? No, of course not. Did you fall in love with her shoes? Her purse? The brand of watch on her wrist?" "Obviously not," he said, irritation creeping into his voice. "Then why?" I asked, my tone even and steady. "Do you think any of those things matter when it comes to me?" His mouth opened, then closed again. For once he didn't have a quick answer. Sarah's eyes shone with pride, though she kept her head down, pretending to scoop more potatoes onto her plate. Brad shifted in his chair, his bravado faltering. It's not the same thing," he muttered. "I just think people should look like they've succeeded. That's all." I smiled faintly. "And I think real success speaks for itself. It doesn't need an introduction." The silence that followed was heavy. Brad's jaw worked like he wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. I let the quiet linger before picking up my fork again, returning to my meal as if nothing had happened. Sometimes the sharpest blade is the one delivered with calm precision. Brad tried to recover, forcing another laugh. "Well, maybe one day I'll convince you to let me take you car shopping. Get you into something that turns heads." I glanced at him, my eyes steady, my voice low. "Oh, Brad. One day I'll turn your head. Don't you worry about that." He laughed again, but it was weaker this time, unsure. My words had unsettled him, though he couldn't quite figure out why. The rest of dinner passed with awkward small talk, Brad noticeably quieter than usual. Sarah looked more relaxed, though she shot me grateful glances now and then. When dessert was done, I stood to leave. Brad walked me to the door again, his smile strained. "Good seeing you, Evelyn. Always a pleasure." I smiled back. "The pleasure's mine." Out at the curb, I opened the door to my old sedan and slid in. The seat creaked, the engine coughed, and the headlights flickered to life. I drove away slowly, but inside my heart was beating faster. Because tonight, for the first time, I had given Brad a taste of resistance. A glimpse that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the pushover he thought I was. And as I turned onto the quiet main road, the plan crystallized even more in my mind. Soon he would see the truth. Not in words, but in something he couldn't ignore. Something that would shatter his shallow little worldview in a single instant. The Lamborghini waited, and its time was coming. I didn't sleep much that night after dinner. The house was quiet, but my mind was alive, turning over every detail of what had just happened. Brad's smirk when he mocked me, the flash of embarrassment in Sarah's eyes, and then the silence after I had finally pushed back. It wasn't anger that kept me awake, it was something else. Anticipation. By morning I was already in the garden, trimming back the roses when my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Mom," she started, her voice low. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." I wiped my gloves on my jeans and pressed the phone tighter to my ear. "Sorry for what, sweetheart?" "For Brad. For everything," she said, her words tumbling out. "He was rude last night. He's been rude every time you've been around, and I don't know how to make him stop. I'm so embarrassed." I leaned against the porch rail and let the morning sun warm my face. "Sarah, don't apologize for someone else's behavior. That's not your burden to carry." She sighed heavily. I don't know what to do. He's so obsessed with appearances, with money, with showing off. And I know you don't care about those things, but he doesn't understand that. He keeps thinking you're, I don't know, less than him." That last part hit me harder than I let on. My daughter's husband thought I was beneath him. He really believed that because of an old car, or because I didn't parade wealth, that I was somehow inferior. I straightened, my voice firm but gentle. "Sweetheart, let me ask you something. Do you love him?" There was a pause. "Yes," she whispered. "I do." "Then that's what matters. But love doesn't mean letting someone walk over the people you care about. It doesn't mean excusing disrespect." "I know," she said, her voice cracking. "I know. I just don't want to fight with him. And when he belittles you, I feel torn in two. You're my mom. You're the strongest person I know. And then he makes you sound like you're weak, and it makes me furious." My heart ached for her. My little girl, caught between loyalty to her mother and her husband. She didn't deserve that. "Sarah," I said softly, "don't worry about me. Sometimes people need to be reminded of what really matters in life. Sometimes they need to be humbled." She sniffled. "And you're going to be the one to do it, aren't you?" I let a smile creep into my voice. "You'll see." We spoke a little longer about lighter things, her garden, a trip she wanted to take, the new book she was reading. But as I hung up, my decision was clear. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about me. It was about Sarah. About teaching her husband that arrogance has no place in a marriage, that respect must go both ways. And I had the perfect tool to deliver that lesson. That evening I went out to the garage. It was quiet inside, the air cool with the faint scent of oil and leather. The overhead light flicked on, and there she was, waiting patiently under her cover. My Lamborghini. I pulled the cover back slowly, reverently, like peeling back the years themselves. The deep emerald paint shimmered under the light, the polished chrome gleaming. The car looked like it had just rolled out of the showroom, even though it was older than Sarah's marriage. I ran my hand along the hood, memories flooding back. My husband's laughter when we first drove it, the thrill of speed on the open road, the way people used to stop and stare. But more than that, I remembered what the car had meant. A reward for years of sacrifice, of late nights and long days, of building something together from nothing. It wasn't just a car. It was a symbol. And now it would serve a new purpose. The next day I made a call to a mechanic I trusted, just to give the car a full tune-up. "Make her sing," I told him. He laughed and promised he would. As the days passed, I carried on as usual, tending my garden, visiting friends, attending church. But inside, I was brimming with anticipation. The plan was simple but effective. Let Brad see what true wealth looks like when it's paired with humility. Let him taste the difference between arrogance and quiet dignity. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Sarah called again that week. Mom, Brad's planning a neighborhood get-together this Saturday. He just bought a new sound system for the backyard, and he's dying to show it off. I think he wants you to come. But well, you know how he is. I smiled. Tell him I wouldn't miss it. When Saturday rolled around, I dressed simply but neatly. A soft cream blouse, slacks, my favorite pearl earrings. I slipped behind the wheel of my old sedan and drove to their house, pulling up right on time. The driveway was packed. Music floated from the backyard. Laughter spilling into the street. Brad's new SUV sat parked out front, gleaming under the sun like a prize bull. As I stepped out of my car, I could already hear him. Hey everyone. Here she is, the guest of honor. And still driving that relic. His friends chuckled, though some shifted uncomfortably. I caught the look of one woman who seemed unimpressed by his tone. I smiled, lifted my chin, and walked up the driveway. Good afternoon, Brad. Looks like quite the party. Oh, it's nothing, he said, waving a hand but puffing out his chest. Just thought I'd show folks a little hospitality. And, let them see what real success looks like. The words hung in the air, arrogant and heavy. I gave him a long, steady look. Success, I said quietly, comes in many forms. He didn't know it yet, but the lesson was already in motion. Because soon, very soon, Brad would see a side of me he never imagined. And when he did, his smug little world would never look the same again. The music was pounding through the backyard as I stepped inside, weaving past groups of people holding drinks and plates of barbecue. Brad had gone all out. String lights zigzagged across the lawn. Expensive speakers blasted a playlist of country hits. And his new SUV was parked in the driveway like a trophy, polished to a mirror shine. Neighbors clustered in little groups, laughing politely at Brad's booming voice as he moved from circle to circle, shaking hands like a politician. He thrived on the attention, every compliment on his beautiful home, or impressive new ride, feeding his ego like gasoline to a fire. Evelyn, he called from across the yard the moment he spotted me. There she is, my favorite mother-in-law. And folks, would you believe she still drives the same car she bought back when Reagan was in office? The group around him burst into laughter. Some chuckled nervously, clearly uncomfortable, but no one dared say anything. Brad had that effect. He pushed until people laughed just to smooth things over. I smiled and walked toward him, my stride slow, steady. Good evening, Brad. Lovely party you've put together. Oh, it's nothing, he said loudly, waving his drink. Just thought I'd let the neighbors see how we live. Make an impression. He gestured toward the SUV gleaming under the string lights. Now that's what I call a car. Fast, sleek, top of the line. A real symbol of success. His eyes darted toward me, daring me to challenge him. I tilted my head, my tone calm but sharp. It certainly is shiny. The group chuckled softly, sensing the undercurrent. Brad wasn't satisfied. He took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound conspiratorial, though everyone could still hear. Seriously though, Evelyn, I don't know how you do it. Driving that old bucket of bolts around town, it's gotta be embarrassing. Don't you ever feel like people are judging you? I met his gaze evenly. Why would I care what strangers think, Brad? He blinked, then grinned, trying to shake off the sting. Because appearances matter. People respect success when they see it. Nobody respects, well, he gestured vaguely, his meaning clear. I let the silence hang for a moment, just long enough to make him squirm. Then I said, respect isn't bought at a dealership, Brad. It's earned in how you treat people. The group around us went quiet. A few people looked at me with something like admiration, their smiles small but genuine. Brad, though, laughed too loudly, clapping me on the shoulder. Ha! You're a tough one, Evelyn. I like that. But mark my words, one of these days we'll get you into something better. I'll even help you pick it out. Sarah appeared then, her face tight with nerves. Mom, can I get you a drink? Maybe some iced tea. Thank you, sweetheart, I said, following her toward the drink table. As we walked, I heard Brad launch into another story about closing a deal, his voice booming above the music. But the laughter this time sounded weaker, thinner. I had struck a nerve, even if he wouldn't admit it. At the drink table, Sarah poured me a glass, her hands shaking slightly. I'm so sorry, Mom, she whispered. He doesn't know when to stop. I placed a hand over hers, steadying her. Don't you worry, Sarah. He'll learn. She glanced at me, puzzled. Learn what? I took a sip of the tea, savoring its coolness. That success isn't measured by the car in your driveway. And that mocking someone's dignity says more about him than it does about me. Sarah bit her lip, then gave me a small nod. She trusted me, even if she didn't yet know what I had planned. The night wore on. Brad kept parading his SUV, even popping the hood at one point to show off the engine to a group of unimpressed neighbors. He bragged about the leather seats, the sound system, the horsepower, as if the machine were an extension of himself. I watched quietly from a chair on the patio, my hands folded in my lap, my face serene. To anyone else it might have looked like I was simply tired. But inside, my mind was already moving forward, already imagining the look on Brad's face when he saw what I had waiting for him. Because while he was busy showing off his new toy, my Lamborghini sat in my garage, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, worth more than his SUV and then some. More importantly, it carried a story. A history of sacrifice, love, and triumph that no amount of arrogance could ever match. By the time the party wound down, Brad was flushed with liquor and laughter, his ego ballooned to twice its normal size. As guests drifted out, he clapped me on the back one last time. "Drive safe, Evelyn. And hey, don't be jealous when I pass you on the freeway." I smiled, slipping into my old sedan, the engine rumbling to life with its familiar growl. "Don't worry, Brad. One day you'll see me pass you." He laughed, not realizing those words weren't a joke. As I pulled away from the curb, leaving the music and laughter behind, I felt a calm determination settle over me. The time for patience was almost over. Soon the charade would end. Brad thought success was measured in chrome and horsepower. He thought mocking me made him stronger, smarter, richer. But he had no idea who he was dealing with. And in just a few days he would find out. A few days after Brad's neighborhood spectacle, I decided the time had come. The insults, the smirks, the smug little digs, those didn't bother me nearly as much as the way Sarah's shoulders had hunched every time her husband opened his mouth. She loved him, but she was ashamed of how he treated me. That was enough. I wanted her to see her mother not as the butt of a cruel joke, but as someone who still had the power to command respect. And more importantly, I wanted Brad to understand that arrogance always meets its match. So on Thursday I called them both. "Why don't you come over for lunch this weekend?" I said cheerfully. "It's been too long since you've seen the house." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear Brad's skepticism. He had never shown much interest in my place. He probably assumed it was as shabby as my car. "Sure, Mom," Sarah said quickly, covering the silence. "We'd love to." When Saturday rolled around, I made sure everything was just right. The table was set with my best china, the kind I rarely took out except on holidays. Fresh flowers filled a vase in the center, their scent light and welcoming. I cooked Sarah's favorites, roast chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, cornbread right out of the oven. And in the garage, under the glow of the overhead light, the Lamborghini sat polished to perfection, every inch of it gleaming like emerald glass. At noon sharp, their SUV pulled into my driveway. I watched from the window as Brad stepped out, his sunglasses perched on his head, his expression faintly amused as he looked at my modest brick house. Sarah, as always, smiled warmly when I opened the door. "Hi, Mom." She hugged me tight, and I could feel in her grip the quiet apology she hadn't spoken aloud. Brad followed, looking around with thinly veiled curiosity. "Nice little place you've got here, Evelyn," he said, his voice polite but tinged with condescension. "Thank you, Brad," I replied with a smile. "It served me well." We sat down to lunch, and for the first half hour the conversation was almost pleasant. Sarah and I chatted about her work, about the plants in my garden, about an old neighbor who'd moved away. But Brad couldn't resist. "So, Evelyn," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I noticed you still drove that old sedan here. Don't you ever get tired of it? I mean, I'd be happy to go with you one weekend to pick out something new. Something that really fits you." Sarah groaned softly, her hand pressing to her forehead. "Brad." But I only smiled. "Oh, I appreciate the offer. But you know, I do have another car." Brad raised his eyebrows. "Another car?" "Yes," I said casually, slicing into my chicken. "Something I don't take out much these days. Too flashy, really?" His curiosity piqued immediately. "Flashy, huh? What is it, a Cadillac? Maybe a BMW?" I dabbed at my lips with my napkin. Why don't I show you? I stood leading them toward the garage. Sarah followed, confused but intrigued, while Brad's grin widened with every step. He was sure I was bluffing, that I'd roll back the door and reveal some 10-year-old minivan at best. I pressed the button, and the garage door slowly lifted. There she was. The Lamborghini's emerald paint caught the sunlight like fire, the sleek lines of its body practically humming with restrained power. Chrome accents gleamed, leather seats shone through the tinted glass, and the badge at the front was unmistakable. Brad froze. His jaw literally dropped. For the first time since I'd known him, he was speechless. Sarah gasped. "Mom, you still have it?" I smiled, running my hand lovingly along the hood. "Of course. Your father and I bought it years ago. A reward for all the years of hard work we put in. He loved this car." Brad took a halting step forward, his voice hushed. This is a Lamborghini." "Yes," I said simply. He circled it slowly, his hand twitching like he wanted to touch it but didn't dare without permission. Do you have any idea what this is worth?" I tilted my head. "Oh, I have a pretty good idea." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of pride. "I remember when you and Dad bought it," she whispered. "You both worked so hard. Everyone said you deserved it." Brad was still circling, his face flushed, his voice reverent. "This is incredible. I had no idea you had something like this. Why don't you ever drive it?" "Because," I said softly, "I don't need to show off what I have to know who I am." The words hung heavy in the air. Brad swallowed, his bravado cracking at the edges. I turned the keys slowly in my hand, letting the metal glint in the light. "Would you like to take it for a spin?" His eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Of course," I said, holding the keys out to him. "Consider it a gift." Sarah gasped. "Mom, what?" But I pressed the keys into Brad's stunned hand, watching as he clutched them like they were made of gold. His face lit up with greedy excitement, 1,000 unspoken thoughts flashing in his eyes. He looked at me, half grinning, half in disbelief. "You're giving this to me?" I nodded. "Yes. It's yours now." His breath came fast, his grin wide, his arrogance resurfacing in an instant. "Wow. I don't even know what to say." I smiled calmly. "Say thank you. And then listen carefully." He blinked, caught off guard by my tone. "Brad," I said evenly, "this car is just metal and leather. It means nothing without respect. Your father-in-law and I bought it not because we wanted to show off, but because it represented our years of sacrifice, our love, our partnership. That's what wealth is. Not bragging, not mocking, not tearing others down." Sarah stood quietly beside me, her eyes shining. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "This car may be in your hands now, but remember this. If you treat it the way you treat people, it won't last long. And neither will the respect of those around you." For the first time, Brad's smile faltered. I patted his arm gently. "Enjoy the car. But remember, it's not the car that makes the man. It's the man who makes the car." The silence stretched, heavy and full of meaning. Sarah looked at me with awe, Brad with stunned confusion. And in that moment the lesson began to sink in. Brad stood frozen in my garage, the Lamborghini keys gleaming in his palm. His eyes darted between me, Sarah, and the car as though he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. This is insane," he finally stammered, a laugh bubbling out of him. "You're actually giving this to me? Like it's mine?" "Yes, Brad," I said calmly, folding my hands in front of me. "It's yours." Sarah shook her head, disbelief written all over her face. "Mom, are you serious? This car is worth—" I raised a hand, gently cutting her off. "I know what it's worth. But some things are worth more than money." Brad didn't hear a word of that last part. He was already moving toward the car, running his fingers along the smooth emerald paint, marveling at the sleek lines like a child in a toy store. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Absolutely unbelievable. My friends are going to freak when they see me driving this. Nobody in the neighborhood has anything close to this." He turned toward me, his grin wide and triumphant. "This is the ultimate car. I'll be the envy of everyone." I kept my face calm, though inside my chest my heart ached, not because of the car, but because of how little he had understood. "Brad," I said quietly. Do you remember what I told you? That this car represented years of sacrifice? That it wasn't about showing off. He blinked, only half listening. Yeah, of course. Hard work, sacrifice, I get it. But come on, Evelyn, this thing's a masterpiece. I mean, look at it. He slipped into the driver's seat, his hands gripping the leather wheel, his head thrown back in awe. He turned the key and the engine roared to life, a deep guttural sound that shook the garage. Brad laughed, a booming, almost manic laugh, revving the engine again and again. Now this is power, he shouted over the noise. This is what I'm talking about. Sarah's face was pale. She glanced at me, eyes wide with worry. I stepped closer to the car, placing a hand firmly on the hood. Brad. He let the engine idle, still grinning. What? I met his gaze, my voice steady and low. You're holding more than just horsepower in your hands. You're holding a legacy. My husband and I bought this not because we wanted to impress anyone, but because it meant something to us. It was a celebration of our love, our hard work, and our resilience. He blinked, his grin faltering for just a second. I continued. And now it's in your care. But if you treat this car the way you've treated me, mocking, belittling, taking it for granted, it won't last. Neither will your respect. Do you understand? For a moment there was silence except for the low purr of the engine. Brad shifted uncomfortably in the seat. His eyes flicked to Sarah, who stood with her arms crossed, watching him with a mixture of hurt and expectation. Then he looked back at me, his bravado crumbling ever so slightly. Yeah, I get it, he muttered, though his tone was unsure, defensive. Do you? I pressed. Because from where I'm standing, all I hear is talk about how other people will see you. About envy, about appearances. But what about respect, Brad? What about humility? He clenched the wheel, his jaw tight. I've worked hard too, Evelyn. I want people to notice. Is that so wrong? Sarah's voice cut in, soft but firm. Wanting recognition isn't wrong, Brad. But tearing my mom down to build yourself up, that is. Her words hit harder than mine ever could. Brad's shoulders slumped, his bravado draining away as he looked at her. I didn't mean to make you feel that way, he said, his voice quieter now. You did, Sarah said simply. Every time you mocked her car, every time you acted like she was less than you, it hurt me. Because she's my mother. And she's worth more than all the cars in the world. The garage was silent again, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Brad looked at me then, his face conflicted. The arrogance was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was tangled now with something else, shame maybe, or realization. I leaned down slightly, placing my hand gently on the roof of the car. Brad, I gave you this Lamborghini not to reward your arrogance, but to challenge it. To remind you that wealth without respect is empty. You may have the car, but unless you change, it will never truly be yours. His eyes flickered, his grip tightening on the wheel. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. Sarah reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. Thank you, Mom, she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. I smiled at her, then looked back at Brad. Drive it carefully. And think carefully, too. Because from here on out, every time you start this engine, I want you to remember this moment. Remember that true success doesn't come from mocking others. It comes from lifting them up. He nodded slowly, his bravado dimmed, though I could still see the storm behind his eyes. When he finally eased the Lamborghini out of the garage, the engine's roar echoing down the street, I stood beside Sarah in the driveway, watching the emerald machine vanish into the distance. She looked at me, her expression torn between awe and worry. Do you think he understood, Mom? I squeezed her hand. Maybe not yet, but he will. Some lessons take time to sink in. We stood there in the quiet, the sun dipping low on the horizon. And though I had just handed over one of the most valuable things I owned, I felt lighter than I had in years. Because the Lamborghini wasn't the gift. The lesson was. And whether Brad realized it or not, he had just been given the chance to change. After Brad drove off in the Lamborghini, the driveway was quiet except for the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Sarah and I stayed for a moment, standing side by side, watching the taillights disappear down the street. Mom, she whispered, her voice trembling. I can't believe you did that. You actually gave him the car. I smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. Yes, sweetheart. But it wasn't really about the car, was it? She shook her head, a small laugh escaping her lips amidst the tears in her eyes. No, it wasn't. It was about him, wasn't it? About teaching him about humility. I nodded. Exactly. The car was just the tool. The lesson, that's what matters. And hopefully, he'll remember it every time he drives it. She looked at me, awe and gratitude in her eyes. Mom, you're incredible. I don't even know what to say. I've never seen anyone handle someone like that with such calm strength. I shrugged lightly, but the truth was I felt a strange sense of peace. The years of sarcasm, the little digs, the endless mocking, they all culminated in this one moment. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I'd struck the perfect balance between justice and grace. The next few days were interesting. Brad drove the Lamborghini every chance he got, showing it off to neighbors, coworkers, anyone who would look. But there was a shift in him that wasn't immediately noticeable. A subtle pause when he spoke, a hesitation before making a joke at someone else's expense. He smiled, yes, but the arrogance wasn't quite as sharp. It wasn't a full transformation, far from it. But I could see the beginnings of self-awareness, the tiniest crack in his armor. And that was enough for now. Sarah called me that evening after another day of watching her husband parade his new toy. Mom, she said softly, he didn't make a single joke about you today. Not one. He acted different. I can't explain it, but I think you got through to him. I smiled quietly, taking a sip of tea. Sometimes, Sarah, people just need a moment to see themselves as others see them. And sometimes that moment needs a little push. I can't thank you enough, she said. You didn't just give him a car, you gave him perspective. And you gave me peace. My heart warmed. That's all I ever wanted, sweetie. For you to feel safe, respected, and proud of the people around you. The days turned into weeks, and gradually, Brad's arrogance continued to soften. He still loved the Lamborghini, of course. But he stopped flaunting it, stopped comparing himself to others, and began to listen more. To Sarah, to me, even to the neighbors he once tried so hard to impress. One evening, Sarah and I sat together in the living room, sharing a quiet cup of coffee. You know, she said, stirring her mug, I think he actually respects you now. Not just because of the car, but because of how you handled everything. Your strength, your patience, your wisdom. He can't hide it anymore. I chuckled softly. It wasn't easy, believe me. But sometimes the quietest lessons make the loudest impact. She smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. I'm proud of you, Mom. Not just for the car, but for being who you are. I felt a swell of gratitude in my chest. All the years of work, all the sacrifices, all the moments I had doubted myself, it all led to this. Later that week, Brad stopped by the house. He had that slightly nervous, uncertain look that only appeared when he wasn't trying to dominate a conversation. Evelyn, he began, his tone softer than usual, I want to thank you, really, for the car, and for everything. I've been a fool sometimes, and I guess I needed a wake-up call. I looked at him, my expression calm but steady. I hope you understand what the car represents, Brad, and that it's more than just metal and paint. It's respect, humility, and integrity. Those are the things that last. He nodded slowly, his eyes meeting mine with something like sincerity. I think I do. I really do. That was all I needed to hear for now. Change, real change, takes time. But the seed had been planted, and I had every confidence it would grow. As he left, I watched him drive off, the Lamborghini roaring beneath him. But this time the roar sounded different. Less about showing off, more about responsibility. Less about arrogance, more about possibility. Sarah hugged me tightly afterward. Thank you, Mom. You didn't just teach him a lesson, you reminded me of the kind of strength I want in my life. In my family. I kissed her forehead. And remember, sweetie, that kind of strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and deliberate. Sometimes it's giving a lesson in the most unexpected way. Later that evening, as I sat alone in the quiet of my living room, I reflected on everything. Life had a way of testing patience, humility, and kindness. It threw challenges at us disguised as insults, arrogance, and mockery. But the key, I realized, was how we responded, not with anger but with grace, intelligence, and purpose. The The Lamborghini, now gone for the moment, sat as a reminder, not of wealth or status, but of what truly mattered: respect, understanding, and the quiet power of wisdom. I smiled to myself, thinking of my late husband. I could almost hear his voice chuckling softly. "Well done, Evelyn. Well done." And in that moment I felt a deep, unshakable peace. Because the lesson had been delivered, the arrogance confronted, and the respect restored. And in the end, that was worth more than any car could ever be.